Hello. Good to see you. Please, have a seat. I don't know about you, but I love to read. I've loved to read since I was very young. Even at that time, I wouldn't shy away from more complicated works, despite my school's insistence on keeping those books out of the hands of students, such as The Handmaid's Tale, To Kill a Mockingbird, etc., etc. Despite this, I loved reading all the ones that made me think. Complex tales, messages from long ago, records of events past, and possible futures. However, just because a text is old or complex does not mean it is immune to tropes. As such, my capacity for certain allegories in literature has been worn thin by exposure. A very common allegory, so common that it has become a trope in and of itself, is the idea of a message or warning. An author attempting to warn their audience of some kind of encroaching or present threat. These include the works of doomsday cultists and prophets, like the works of Nostradamus or those attributed to him, that are said to contain warnings of world-ending events. Many works of the 19th and 20th centuries served as allegories for their respective political climates. L. Frank Baum's Oz series and Miller's Crucible come to mind. Even works such as Brave New World and 1984 are meant to serve as warnings against totalitarian regimes, such as those experienced and witnessed by their respective authors. It is the mention of this final work that I'm reminded of this grand pedestal that George Orwell's work is often elevated to, not just as literary fiction, but instead as words of supposed divination, much like Nostradamus is often credited. While Orwell's work is very compelling to read and has made its place in history, most of the people that actually write about it seem to forget one important thing, that these works were products of their time. One of Orwell's most famous works, the previously mentioned 1984, was written in 1949. Therefore, all the comparisons that are made nowadays to Orwell's most prominent work seem to forget that very important detail, that important detailed context. However, due to 1984 now taking place in public lexicon as being equivalent to any seemingly widespread totalitarian push or regime, the comparisons to it are made for everything from actual totalitarian regimes like those faced during Orwell's time to advertising campaigns of seemingly harmless if unuseful impact. Oh, you're just a razor company? Doesn't matter. Total Orwellian nightmare abounds, Big Brother is watching, IngSoc rules all, thought crime, etc., etc. Oh god, I'm so tired. It's gotten to the point that comparing anything, whether it be a field of study, a company, a government, any sort of organized method of thought, to Orwell's display of complete totalitarian control, is now a trope. A meme, even. The work I'll be talking about today, however, is not trying to be funny like a meme. It's not even trying to play with this trope, it's using it wholesale. The work I'm referring to is David Edger's 2012 techno-pre-apocalypse novel, The Circle. While the message of technology leading to the eventual downfall of all forms of government, culture, and individualistic humanity is a popular one, it's not often that that sort of message takes place in a completely serious novel during this current digital age that we find ourselves in. That sort of thing That's the sort of thing typically left as a byproduct of fears of technology during the era of Y2K, during a time when a cyberpunk future was imagined not as feasible. That's the sort of thing typically left as a byproduct of fears of technology during the era of Y2K and other conspiracies, during a time when a cyberpunk future was imagined but not feasible, feared but not seen. This sort of message is typically left to editorials and op-eds made by people who really don't seem to fully grasp how technology is advancing and for what purpose. That said, it's not impossible to write this sort of book. Technological advancement can be scary and in need of warning. It can lead to a nigh apocalyptic future if used inappropriately. it is my humble opinion that David Edgers did not do that. No, instead he wrote what I can realistically only describe as a fear-mongering, out-of-date homage to Orwell's 1984. Rather than simply calling out an author on their work, after reading The Circle, I was filled with a certain kind of vitriol, a nagging motivation. I was not satisfied to simply criticize Edgers' writing. No. I had to fix it. I had to make it better. I had to make it realistic. I had to make it an actually relevant technological dystopian novel. And so, today, I set out to fix David Edgers' The Circle. Oh yeah, and a spoiler warning for George Orwell's 1984, David Edgers' The Circle, a few snippets from each of the movies that have been made therefore, and a few references to Avatar: The Last Airbender. Don't worry about the last one, it makes sense in context. Speaking of which, before I go about fixing this book, there are a couple of primers that need to be set. Some context, if you will. As I already established, George Orwell wrote 1984, not in its titular year, as he had already died, but instead in 1949. Orwell was writing from a place not of base fear, but of realistically threatened existence and lived experience. Orwell had not only lived through 2 world wars and fought in Spain's civil war against the rise of Franco. No, not that one. No, the other one. Yes. And through the possibility of Britain turning into a fascist dictatorship during World War II, but had also witnessed the atrocities committed by the various fascist and totalitarian regimes of the first half of the 20th century. When Orwell began writing about Oceania and the widespread, influential nature of Ingsoc, he didn't have to venture far. He needed only look at the totalitarian states of Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and Franco. In such states, control of information was the norm, control of thought was the desire. The idea of a largely ignorant populace being influenced by a much more powerful and knowledgeable government was the cornerstone upon which the fascists and Stalinists of the 20th century prided themselves and desired to become. So, to summarize my point a bit more succinctly, the comparisons between anything and Orwell's 1984 need to be had with a grain of salt, given the very specific circumstances under which that story was able to be written and influenced. Most comparisons to Orwell's work are made with a certain understanding of hyperbole. That hyperbole is not found in the work of David Edgers. Speaking of the man who spurred on this long tirade, I'm so sorry. The context of Edgers' The Circle is a much more nuanced one than is presented in the book. The Circle was most likely written around 2012, given that it was published in 2013. Even between George Orwell's imagined year of 1984 and the actual time that Edgers wrote this book, nearly 40 years had passed. Technological advancement in 1949 was limited to the very early beginnings of computing, the first introduction of consumer-grade television, and the widespread use of radio technology. Compare that to 2012, where the idea of a smartphone is borderline necessary to exist as a functioning member of human society, where almost everyone is universally reachable by said device, and the entire wealth of human information, past, present, and possible future, is available in the palm of your hand. The disparity between available information alone in 1949 and 2012 is a staggering thing to behold. With that in mind, it's almost insane to look at Edgers' work and see how far removed from reality it is. In Orwell's day, things like personal communication were limited to what one could write down in a letter and send over whatever service was available. It's honestly not that far removed from what was available to wealthy noble persons as far back as 400 years or even earlier. Compare that with Edgers' time, where almost all communication that's still widely used is nearly instantaneous. This is also a period of time when non-interpersonal communication, things like advertisements, have become so widespread as to be ubiquitous. Being advertised to is no longer limited to someone yelling in the streets or what someone could read in a newspaper. Now, as long as you exist in functioning human society, you could be advertised to. And so, in Edgers' context, all communication across all spectrums is now ubiquitous, instantaneous, and accessible. With that kind of accessibility in mind, let's take a look at where Edgars went wrong in writing an Orwellian nightmare centered on availability of information. Now, before I go into everything about the Circle that I thought was done incorrectly, let's go into some things that Edgars' homage kind of got right. Let's start where all logical plots start, the ending. I'll see myself out later. The feeling of helplessness at the end of The Circle evokes a lot of Orwellian motifs. You can draw a parallel between Winston in 1984 and May in The Circle at the very end, in that they both give in to the overarching structure that has been putting them into a mold throughout the course of each book. This motif can actually be seen outside the realm of the dystopian apocalyptic genre in cosmic horror in the works of H.P. Lovecraft, Robert Bloch, and August Derleth. The act of giving up in the face of an insurmountable entity, or in the case presented here, a system, exemplifies the dystopian subgenre of sci-fi, and Orwell's brand thereof very well. This even extends outside the scope of literature into television, such as the totalitarian deep state presented in Book 2, Episode 14 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Roll clip, please.
Calm down. You're safe now. There's no war in Ba Sing Se.
This particular clip actually demonstrates what I'm talking about quite well, in that the Earth Kingdom city of Ba Sing Se is basically in this state of information blackout, where the citizens of the city don't know what's going on with the war outside of the city's walls, hence the very popular meme, "There is no war in Ba Sing Se." This fits in with the dystopian genre pretty well in the element of information control that is so common with these types of regimes. To cycle back to the beginning, Edgars does do well to mention the state of the job economy facing a lot of new graduates both back in 2012 and up till now, nearly a decade later. While May's commentary during this opening section can be taken as a bit bratty, it's not so egregious as to completely disregard the previous well-made point. Unfortunately, this is where my praises of Edgars' work is going to have to end. However, I will relegate my other nitpicks to a series of blots of text around my face in order to keep things moving along and to make the commentary a bit more poignant. Pause at any point to read the little bits. Okay, bearing in mind the difference in time setting, it's clear that Edgars is attempting to emulate Orwell. That's made obvious by his various uses of motifs, even down to the use of slogans by the overarching organization, in Edgars' case being The Circle, in use of control. However, a technology company does not a government make. So when you're writing a techno-dystopia, you cannot use the exact same types of motifs when describing a tech company as you would a totalitarian government, because the type of control each one inhabits is not even close to the same thing. A totalitarian regime is attempting to take over the thought process of its citizenry. A tech company, even at its most powerful, is at most trying to sell you something.
It feels like somebody wants to sell me something!
Thank you, Correspondent SquarePants. Because that is how money is made. That is how companies work. And so the main question that comes up in The Circle's motivation is simply this: where's the monetization? Where's the advertising? The closest we see to that in the book is all the various people in May's department will recommend things to buy online to their followers. It can be inferred that there's some kind of an affiliate program that the Circle has with whatever company is being promoted, but that's not a lucrative way that major corporations make money. That's a way that an Instagram influencer gets a paycheck. And the last time I checked, Google isn't posting vacation and swimsuit pics. I'll admit, Edgars does do one thing right when it comes to tech companies in the modern day. Figures and networking are everything. Various people in the book are obsessed with connecting with the right people, particularly once May goes transparent, because then she can be used effectively as a megaphone for other people's messages. This can also be seen in the fact that throughout this entire book, at least one massive, overly specific number is on every single page. And while these things can be useful, they're also ham-fisted and repetitive to the point of annoyance. It makes the book entirely unenjoyable to read at times. When writing about a post-capitalist hellhole, one does not have to make the book a hellhole to read. Finally, as was previously mentioned in the introduction to this video, 1984 imagery is a bit heavy-handed in The Circle, even down to the big organization literally headed by a charismatic, enigmatic figure being eventually represented by 3 intellectually contradictory, easy-to-learn slogans.
That technology is a big brother.
Get back, you Creative Writing 101 hack!
No, got a spleen.
Where were we? Right. Oh, right, now I remember. The idea of companies having slogans is not new. In fact, it's a product of a much older age, before the overabundance of advertising made most young people pretty numb to it. The use of slogans is no longer considered marketable, but instead something cringy and overly corporatized, and just overall unappealing. Slogans cannot be used to win people over anymore. Nowadays, when you see people attempting to market, you see things like meme marketing being more commonly used. The fact that The Circle is using demonstrably Orwellian slogans is laughable, given the fact that this is supposedly a massive technology company headed by the smartest people in the world, people who would theoretically have read at least one book and therefore would be at least marginally knowledgeable in things like basic dystopia tropes.
You basic.
Yeah, I noticed.
With all that out of the way, why don't I take a crack at it? Small disclaimer. Am I insinuating that I'm a better writer than David Edgers? No. Am I insinuating that I might have some valuable insight into the mind of an actual young person coming up in a post-capitalist hellhole such as this one that might be the birthing grounds of some sort of surveillance state who is privy to and subject to all aspects thereof? Yes. Yes, I am. A lot more so than David Edgers, who is literally almost as old as my mother. No offense, Mom, you're gorgeous. I'll address this directly. First off, Mr. Edgers. Actually, David, can I call you David? I'm gonna call you David. So listen, David, if you're going to write some kind of warning based on the overreach of technology and social media, why don't you take inspiration from all that we have around us right now? We have social media companies right now that are so powerful that they're already allowing the influencing of elections. Looking to you, Mark. It's not out of the realm of possibility to think that some kind of malevolent technology company would take advantage of this and even try to influence the elections themselves in order to obtain things like lobbyists and collaborators in office and things that are actually useful, rather than attempting to just update the voting system and make it secure, effectively for free? Yeah, I don't know what you were thinking with that one. Doing things of substance for free is not the way of modern internet companies, and furthermore, it's not profitable. There's also the fact that no one is afraid of sharing their opinion. The internet has made a lens of anonymity available at the stroke of a finger. Even on Facebook, a website where accountability would feasibly be easier, people feel emboldened to proclaim and support their most base desires and opinions simply because they are not face-to-face with the people that would disagree with them most. Instead, the way you make social media actually scary beyond just accessibility and information is to grant them some kind of extra power through another body, like a government that might not be able to update with the times, and consider the repercussions of their actions in the immediate and long terms. One plot point could be the Circle managing to push through a bill in Congress that suddenly allows them to take IP addresses and assign them to people's identities, like their birth certificates, thereby destroying that form of anonymity. This takes away the main crux of the internet being a lawless wasteland where influence is had over the course of the long term and even then in the minute scale. When everyone knows who you are, suddenly you are much more influenceable and much more influential. While I hate the word because it sounds like some McCarthyist-era scare tactic, the info-communist thing was not the incorrect road to go down. However, you needed to go the extra logical leap to full identity purveyance. On the previously mentioned note of lobbyists, the idea that the Circle, in this theoretical rewrite that I'm writing, would attempt to get lobbyists and other politically influential people into their wheelhouse, even extending into the idea of them furnishing a particular candidate for public office, makes a lot more sense if you're trying to write a technology company steadily subsuming the idea of government and creating its own version of an Orwellian regime. Effectively, what I'm saying is that taking inspiration from more cyberpunk fiction would actually help you, because that is turning into the more realistic probability here compared to what you have already. As per my last points, I'm going to touch on the main thing that bugged me about the Circle as a company, which is they don't advertise to anyone. They're not trying to sell anything, they're not trying to make services available to rate. They're just doing all of these things presumably for free. With so much focus on facts and figures, you'd think that the cost of all of these various programs would be publicly known, when in fact that just isn't the case. Maybe this is related to your idea of privacy being the main commodity that technology companies are after, but that's just silly. Information is not itself money. It is the byway by which companies can make money by making more accurate advertising and more individualized advertising. You were on the right track, but in your infinite sea of figures, numbers, and details, you left out the main one that would be a driving force behind a company going through all of this social upheaval and rapid technological integration in the public sphere, and for the average Joe, them getting access to the most intimate version of advertising ever before seen. Part of the problem is that in our current setting, we're already seeing some of the things that you're referring to in your book now in an unironic, very serious way. Every person has an extremely high-quality, sophisticated camera and microphone in their pocket at all times. Most people have made their homes smarter and therefore more internet-connected, and by extension, recordable and trackable and marketable. The idea that everyone would suddenly become a social media influencer a la May's transformation post-going transparent, merely at the presence of cameras is a bit insane, when we have a ubiquity of cameras and recording equipment and everyone is not doing that. The idea of a social influencer being an actual job is now prevalent and less of a weird niche, but the idea that so many people would suddenly give up all forms of independent thought as soon as a camera is pointed at them denies one very important aspect of humanity: we're stubborn. We can even see that outside of technology and in the political sphere. Most people, when presented with hard evidence of something completely contradictory on how they carry on their life, their beliefs, their existence at a core, they continue on the way that they were comfortable with anyway. In psychology, this is known better as the backfire effect. In layman's terms, people are stubborn, and despite what someone might say or prove, they will continue on doing what they do and believing what they will and defending what they have. Cameras mean nothing, evidence means nothing, truth means nothing when in a post-truth world accountability is no longer a safeguard, it's just there. Congratulations, you've made it to the end. In conclusion, while I am acutely aware that I am a mere college student who is not going to be able to influence an award-winning author on the very concepts on which they based their Orwellian nightmare, I do hope that anyone that might have simply consumed David Edger's work without much thought now goes back and thinks again on what it actually meant, and not accepting that it is deep simply based on the fact that it sounds vaguely like the work of, in my opinion, a much better author. This critique is not based solely on the fact that Edgers is basing a lot of his type of messaging on Orwell. If every time a trope was used, someone took umbrage with it, we would no longer be able to enjoy anything. Tropes are the backbone of a lot of narrative fiction, and the use of them
is not inherently bad. However, the use of these tropes in a context which is structured in a way that does not make sense given the subject matter, that is something that I take personal umbrage with, because I find it is another kind of dishonesty. I'm aware that a lot of fears concerning technology are generational. We're not even 2 decades away from when people thought that the clocks not being able to make it to a new millennium would destroy the internet. There's also the idea of the singularity coming to destroy humanity, and the idea in philosophy of technological advancement is so old that it is the basis of several best-selling books and blockbuster movies. Terminator and the System Shock video game series come to mind immediately. However, given recent events, it's clear what the dangers of technology can be to nations, states, societies, and peoples. The role that technology plays in our lives is now not only undeniable but necessary. As a result, the availability of information, not of other people, but in general, is extremely important and scary, but not for the reason it was presented by Edgers in The Circle. Instead, what we have to worry about is something that Orwell himself emphasized in 1984. The idea of information being intentionally changed and blocked to the benefit of those in power. This can be a government, this can be a company, but in the age of the internet, while all information is available, not all information is static. And so, David Edgers, if I'm to conclude my thoughts more succinctly, if you're gonna make tech scary, ask a millennial. You might have a better idea of what goes bump in the night than you do.